when the Gang of Eight were together after Trudeau had left the table, and then we were going to fight him in the courts, we had our own meetings.
Wow.
And one of the meetings was in a hotel in Montreal. I don't know if I've recorded this or I mentioned it on your program one of the last 2 times. I'm not sure. And I got to write it down somewhere because I've got it in my note somewhere. Lougheed and Levick almost came to blows.
Really? I bet it wasn't over a golf game.
No.
Are you at liberty to say why they got upset with each other? Or is it violating a confidence?
Well, I can't get in too much into that, but simply to say that what happens in all these kinds of circumstances, as I know you appreciate in dealing with clients and other lawyers, after a while, if you hammer it so much, that's like me now, in hammering, after a while, people turn off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? They turn off.
Yeah.
And I think on the couple of points that Levick was making, and almost implying that some of us who are on the federal side on these, that's when lies were, just 1 second now. Just 1 second, ready. You are implying, I got to tell you. And the football player came out.
Well, he had just been through the national energy policy, so
and
in fairness.
Course, exactly, and so much more. Well, no question. So, there was no question, and there was stuff written, and I think a lot of that has been destroyed. For example, what has been destroyed also is those proposals in my book of 2012. And I still have them here in the file. Copies of my proposals like that I put on the table in the night of November 4th, and then presented the next day to the premiers, and then later I presented on behalf of the premiers to the full conference, which led only a few hours later to a deal. It was based upon those proposals.
Right.
I went looking for them when I was writing my book, and I had to search. Of course, I had to go to the archives in the government of Canada. Nowhere to be found. Those proposals are nowhere to be found.
Incredible, but they are retained in your book.
Yes, yeah. I copied them all and had them put in my book.
That's a blessing. That's a blessing. It's and
Brian, I still have them here.
It is hard for contemporary Canadians to imagine a group of premiers like yourselves, like the Group of Eight, who were prepared not only to stand up to a prime minister and tell him to get in his lane, as it were, but more than that, who were willing to sit down and do really hard work and try to build something as important as the Constitution, as important as the Charter. That spirit of cooperation, that spirit of pushback in terms of being first ministers, not being people that a prime minister could just go around. That's been lost in our country politically. Do you have an explanation as to why we don't have more premiers? And I don't want to sort of color them all with the same brush, but there are a group of premiers in this country who really are yes men for Trudeau, and that wasn't true of your time. What do you think has changed in the political landscape in Canada that would explain?
I have spent a lot of time thinking about that. I've tried to write about it on occasion. Sometimes I have in a paragraph or two, and I have real difficulty coming to grips with it. Very often, when you're in power, you have some sort of power. In my case, as a provincial premier in a small province, but still the power situation is there. And you're looking around for people to be strong people, both to be ministers, but also to be deputy ministers, and people. And you see this person who is unbelievably competent as a director of finance of a given department and has helped produce cabinet papers and you ask who are the authors of these papers and so on. And then you might have had an opportunity to see this person in action in various meetings you would have with this ministry and that ministry, right? And the ministers and deputy ministers would bring in some of their other key people that helped them formulate this cabinet paper and so on. Well, you know what? That person who was unbelievable ADM became a disastrous DM. They didn't grow in leadership.
Mm.
They didn't grow in leadership. They couldn't think outside their own narrow, particular field. Even though watching them in action, I could have swore, I could have bet my house on that this person would work out, only to find out later they didn't. There were others who did grow into the job, but they were in the minority. They were in the minority. In the same way with the ministers, they were in the minority. And so this issue of leadership, I did a speech on it once over in Vancouver. I think I still have it somewhere. And I actually went back to Alexander.
Yeah.
I actually went back to Alexander.
We're talking Alexander the Great, or who conquered the world by the age of 30. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I went back to Alexander the Great. And an incident which is recorded in the book, which I still have here in my library, here, my very small library now. But I kept certain books and one of them was Alexander's, right? About Alexander, where he was confronted with this incident whereby one of the major power, I think it might have been the king of Persia or whatever, he was making big inroads militarily and so on. By the way, he always kept books with him when he went on all his campaigns. And he had a library with him. He had a whole bunch of people who know nothing about military stuff, but were just thinkers.
Sure. Yeah.
Alexander did. Of course, he had Aristotle.
Yes.
Around as well as one of his teachers.
Yeah.
But he didn't have, there was a very important part of his entourage as he went and on these military excursions. But in one real key incident where he was given an unbelievable offer, including the daughter of the king or whatever, and a whole bunch of land and a whole bunch of that. And his general came to him and said to him, if I was Alexander, right? If I was Alexander, I would accept this proposal. He said, and if I were you, we would not be here today, or whatever. That's a wonderful quote. I'll find it and send it to you. But it's much better than what I just said now. In other words, I'm not you, you're not me. Here's what I have to do. He went on and rejected the proposal and defeated the enemy, which he in general thought he wasn't going to be able to do, and did many, many more things. But he showed leadership. He showed maturity, that he knew who he was. He knew what he believed in, and he knew how he was going to accomplish it. Yeah. What's happened in today's world through our educational system, it seems to me, like I've got professors that I remember, right? Others that I quite quickly forgot. But I still have a number, 2 or 3 professors and 1 teacher. There were leaders. They were unbelievable leaders in their field. You don't see that much anymore. And we're not cultivating excellence, nor are we using the word or cultivating the word leadership. In my day, I had my dad, I had my grandfather on both sides of my family. And I had a great high school final year of school. Finally, there was a teacher. And luckily, I went to university and discovered 2 or 3 really first-class scholars and people who were, people of the world, and who they themselves grew into their jobs and would give you great examples and great things to read right? So I think it's a question of the lack of reverence towards the concept of leadership.
You're talking about a servant leadership, where a person understands that their role is they have a duty to the people that they're serving, as opposed
Exactly.
to this sort of entitlement that elected people seem to presume today simply
Exactly.
because they got more votes than the next person.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Brian, I want to sort of segue into that, and I want to get to a couple of things you've written on your blog recently. But before we go there, there's one final sort of general question about what's happening in the Canadian polity right now. As you know, the federal Liberals are sinking like a stone to the bottom of the ocean in the polls. And it looks like, by all accounts, it's very likely that Mr. Poilievre is going to be our next prime minister at some point. But do you think that the problems that we're experiencing in Canada right now, most of which have been created by the Trudeau Liberals, in my respectful view, can be solved through a change at the ballot box, or do you think one of the antidotes to what we have right now, and perhaps a more effective one, would be a group of strong leaders in their respective provinces working together as a coalition to fight against this federal government overreach? Which one do you think would be more effective in terms of trying to restore some sense of reason and justice and really purpose to the Canadian political scene? Because if you look at what people are saying now, the confidence in our political leaders, the confidence in our institutions across the board, in our educational system, it's just been almost completely lost by most people. And no one seems to believe that there's some people are saying that Canada is broken. But do you think that a federal election it could potentially fix that, or do you think more needs to be done? Something along the lines of what I described, for example, with premiers working together.
I thought up to a few years ago that it would be possible to do it through the federal, if you will, system and new parties. But my experience has has led me in a different direction.
Right.
And so I don't think a change, as important and as necessary as it is to rid ourselves of where the Liberal Party has descended, that there is the strength, and again come back to the whole business of duty to serve, of leadership, of leadership to restore the country's integrity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's missing, and then you might have seen that on my blogs over time, is the whole question of honesty and integrity.
Yes. Yes.
And I just saw it again in the last few days, right in the last few weeks, as it related to the leader of the BC Conservative Party here in BC, of
Yes.
which I was a member
Yes.
long before his conversion.
Yeah.
And what he has done, appointing candidates and so on, the same undemocratic system that I thought he was in favor of getting rid of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And his dishonesty towards me, for example, as an individual, as a person who's lived here in BC since '93. So I've come to the view that some other means must be found to restore our confederation, our federal system, our country, Canada. And that, of the two that you posed, there's no question that if there was 5 or 6 strong premiers today advocating a national vision for Canada, that it would be more effective than changing the political parties in Ottawa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree totally. Now, I want to talk about a couple of things you've written about recently on your blog. One of them was you commented on recent convictions that occurred in Alberta over the Coutts affair.
Yeah.
And you said, our legal system may find me or us guilty, but the legality and morality of our country are no longer aligned. Now, that was actually a quotation from Marco von Hugenboss. But
Yes.
you picked up on that, and you wrote a very interesting blog piece about that case, expressing your concern about it in the context of the Canadian legal system. You want to explain kind of the crux of what you were concerned about there?
Yes, well, it seems to me once again that the whole issue of the morality of our nation, as supposed to be expressed as the supremacy of God, which is the beginning of the Constitution that we talked about, has been demeaned, has been lost. And once you start to look at a national entity, right, in terms of divorcing yourself from integrity and honesty and morality, then you are in trouble as a country. The way these people were treated too, right? The Coots people, the way they have been treated, um, uh, is not part of the national jurisprudence of our country, right? There's once again, no morality or fairness in the system. I always, years ago, used the word fair. And I remember years ago as a boy when we were selecting teams on a makeshift rink or a makeshift soccer field, and suddenly one dominant person was trying to stack the one team against the team that I was going to be on, and you could see it clearly there. And I remember having fights with this person, and my word was, I go home and say to my dad, but it wasn't fair. And so it seems to me that in moving away as we have, both in our school system and universities and so on, through the fabric of our nation, moving away from, for example, nobody's concerned about, I mean, I've written all the previous, all the, like Mr. Polyev and others, and Mr. Singh and all the leaders in the federal parliament said, why will you not amend the conflict of interest legislation and close the loophole whereby a federal MP cannot serve if he's violated the Canadian law, as
Right.
determined by the Ethics or Conflict of Interest Commissioner or a court of law? Why won't you close that? Now, this tells you everything you want to know. This tells you all you want to know. And guess what the Conservatives did and why I dismissed them as being capable of restoring